Join us on an investigative journey as we educate each other on a scientific discovery, concept, or phenomenon.
Then we'll take a dive into the complicated and misleading world of pseudoscience to sort the factual from the fabricated.
I'm Matt McCabe.
And I'm Levi Bateman.
And this is IdioFacto. So this week I am going to talk to you about organ transplants.
Cool.
The technical term for taking organs from someone else and putting them in another person is allografting.
Allografting.
As opposed to autografting. Auto meaning self, allo meaning other. So I think that's the first point that I would really like to make, is the importance of breaking words down into their components. And a lot of jargon is really difficult to get your head around if you don't understand the components of the words.
It's the importance of etymology.
Yes.
Not to be confused with entomology, the study of insects.
Yes, it's the importance of knowing your insects.
Yes.
Words.
Definitely origin of words. While we're on that, should we explain the origin of IdioFacto?
Oh, why not?
Interesting little
Etymology
sidebar.
is important, as it was a suggestion from my girlfriend and your sister, Phoebe.
Yeah, fun fact.
I suggested calling our podcast Ipso Facto. Then I thought that was a bit generic, and she suggested that because we're talking about cerebral things and we're also talking about pseudoscience things, that idio would be a good prefix for the facto.
And we've had many conversations about cause idiopathic as well. The medical term for when there's not necessarily an identifiable cause to why you've got the illness, it's just idiopathic, which is almost as good as saying I'm not sure, but it comes from within.
The prefix idio means personal, and facto is the Latin word for fact, so it just means own facts, basically.
And we've committed the cardinal sin of combining a word of Greek origin and Latin origin, right?
We won't do it again, but as you'll see, autografting and allografting is also combining Greek terms with... It's a cardinal sin, sure, but it is a common one.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't feel too bad. So IdioFacto, your own facts. Here you go. Also a play on the ipso facto, which is a Latin phrase meaning by that very fact. It's just about facts, basically. That's the best way of... It sounds cool. It was a bit catchy. That's as far as we got with it.
Yeah, and it's kind of stuck now. It was always just a temporary name. We thought, oh, that sounds quite good. Will we come up with anything else? Well, we're not sure, but until we do, let's just call ourselves IdioFacto.
Too late now.
And now that's who we are, for better or for worse.
So getting back to transplants,
Mm.
we've spoken about how it's called allografting, but graft is...
When I think about grafting, as a gardener, I think about grafting one type of plant onto another type of plant. And essentially that's what you're doing.
That is the same thing. It's from the late Middle English graph, so the same as meaning writing.
Yeah, right.
But it's just come to mean, like what you said, with grafting one plant onto another plant.
Mm-hmm.
And so now in medicine it refers to living tissue being transplanted.
And probably more relatable, a skin graft.
Yes, well, a skin graft is just a tissue transplant.
Right.
It's a skin transplant.
Yeah, cool.
So the graft is the actual organ that's being transplanted. So in a kidney transplant, the graft is the kidney that is transplanted.
Yes, okay.
So as I said before, auto meaning self. So an autograft is when you take your own organ or tissue and transplant it somewhere else in your own body. So skin, for example, a skin graft from your own body is a type of autograft.
Okay.
Allo means other. So an allograft is from another organism. So a kidney transplant, for example, would be a type of allograft. And most of the transplants that we're talking about today will be a type of allograft.
Okay.
Organ transplantation has been considered one of the greatest human achievements of the 20th century, which would be arguable, but I would say that in medicine it's probably one of the most amazing things that we can do.
Yeah, a bit of a game changer, really. I mean, there would have been a time when if you had a dud heart or if you had a disease in the lungs, that was it. Your time was up. But
Yeah, that's right.
I guess these days it's not game over necessarily.
In 1933, the first human kidney transplant was performed.
Wow, that early.
Yeah, it was a huge failure.
Oh.
because they didn't understand the immune reaction that would happen when you transplant one person's kidney into another person's body.
This is rejection, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there were no immunosuppressants used, and it was rejected, and the person died. So, yeah, quite an ominous start to the transplant era. But in 1954, the first successful kidney transplants were performed, and it was between twins, genetically identical twins.
Right.
So there was no rejection because they're genetically identical.
Okay.
In 1963, the first human liver transplant was performed, and that was using immunosuppressants. And it's been a steady but incremental increase in patient survival post-operation from that point on.
These immunosuppressant drugs, did they design these for the purpose of organ transplantation?
Not entirely. Immunosuppressants are useful in a lot of other situations as well.
Okay.
The most common types of transplants are kidney, followed by liver transplants. And then you can also transplant lungs, heart, skin, heart valves. There are a ton of benefits, obviously, to transplants. It effectively just replaces a failing organ with a functioning one, which greatly improves and or extends the life of the patient.
Mm-hmm.
Usually these patients have kidney failure or liver failure or something like that it's hard to deal with in day-to-day life, and it will eventually lead to their death. It is the optimum way of dealing with those problems because it uses organs that would otherwise be just wasted. A dead person is not likely to use their liver, for example.
Well, not just not likely. They have no use for it anymore.
That's right.
Full stop.
Yeah. You might as well use it for something.
Absolutely.
It's far more effective and successful than other techniques used to deal with end-stage kidney failure and liver disease and things like that. What other techniques there are very arduous, like dialysis, for example, requires a lot of hospital time.
That's right, and it's not the end result, so to speak. It's just a treatment.
Yeah, so it's not a cure. It's just a means of letting you survive for a bit longer.
That's right.
And as we go further on, you'll see that transplants are not necessarily a cure either, but they're a hell of a lot better than doing dialysis every week.
Yes.
Generally, the outcomes are better the younger the patient.
All right, that makes sense.
If you have a child that has kidney failure and they get a transplant while they're young, they have much better outcomes than a 70-year-old who gets a liver transplant.
So this is the age of the
age of the recipient.
The recipient, but what about the age of the donor? Does that affect success?
It can, but the health of the organ is more important than anything else.
Right.
You can't take a liver from someone who's had hepatitis, for example, because it's an unhealthy liver, and there's no point in replacing an unhealthy liver with an unhealthy liver. Which leads me to the problems with organ transplants. The main one is that of the availability of viable organs. Firstly, there's the fact that we don't automatically donate organs. It's a thing that you have to purposefully request.
Mm-hmm.
Then in Australia, even if you request to be an organ donor, your next of kin can override that wish after your death.
Really?
Yeah.
So how can we guarantee ourselves that our organs are going to be donated?
You can't.
Wow.
We'll get onto that a bit later, but I would encourage everyone to have that conversation with their families before it gets to that point.
Mm.
So there's the availability of the organs themselves that people have donated or not donated, as it may be. There's the storage of those organs. So lungs and hearts last a maximum of 6 hours. So
wow.
If the donor doesn't die in hospital or isn't transported to hospital very quickly, and the recipient isn't in hospital or transported to the hospital very quickly, you can miss the opportunity.
Wow.
So some of these surgeries can take up to 4 hours on their own. A heart transplant requires a lot of luck, a lot of things to go your way to receive new lungs or a new heart.
That's right. There's a lot of things aligning there.
Yeah, well, most people who require lung or heart transplants are on a waiting list. And if you're high on that waiting list, you would be waiting by the phone, basically waiting for a call to... If you're not already in hospital, you'd be waiting by the phone for a call to say, come in, we've had a heart donation. We need to get it out of them and into you as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Kidneys can last up to 72 hours.
Wow, okay, that's not too bad.
So that's a bit better. And skin can last up to 5 years if it's...
5 years, wow.
Yeah, if it's properly stored. The surgical techniques are a problem as well. We are constantly figuring out small improvements that we can make to the surgical techniques in organ transplantation, but that's taken a long time to get to this point, and there's still things that we do that in 5 years' time we'll probably go, why did we used to do that? That didn't make any sense.
Yeah, this is just medicine though, I suppose.
Medicine in general.
We're doing what we think is best at the time.
The best available evidence says that this is the way it should work, and as new evidence comes to light, well, we'll see a bit later on that new evidence is coming to light and there might be better ways of doing it in the future anyway. Because they're very difficult surgical techniques, it requires talented surgeons and they are not easy to come by. So that's another problem. And the second biggest problem behind the availability of organs is the fact that recipients of new organs have to undergo immunosuppressant therapy for the rest of their lives after receiving their transplant.
Wow. Okay.
If your immune system is intentionally suppressed, or even if it's unintentionally suppressed for any reason, that opens you up to a whole lot of other infections secondary to your liver issues, for example.
Wow. So the transplant solves your organ failure problem, but it opens you up to a whole swath of immuno issues.
So they call them transplant-inherent comorbidities. Hypertension, infections, cancer, chronic kidney disease in non-renal transplant patients. So if you get a liver transplant, it opens you up to chronic kidney disease.
Jeez.
Yeah, and the biggest one is a thing that's generally called graft versus host disease, or GVHD, which is the reason that you take the immunosuppressants in the first place, which is your own body rejecting the new organ because it doesn't match your DNA.
Wow, okay. I see what you mean by an organ transplant not necessarily being a cure. And it's not the end of the line. Like once you've got your organ, it doesn't, you're not out of the woods, so to speak.
No, it's not like you come in for an organ transplant and they go, here's new kidney, see you later, thanks very much. It is a lifelong battle from then on. The success of transplants has gradually improved over the years. It's mainly due to small incremental improvements in all of those areas, especially the organ storage and the immunosuppression techniques. And by 2010, there was a 90% one-year survival rate for kidney transplants, and similar for liver transplants, although it was slightly worse, which is pretty good. If you get a kidney transplant in 2010, you had a 90% chance of still being alive a year later.
Yeah, and to me that sounds like, what, you only get another year, but to some people that had failing organs, they probably had days or maybe weeks to live.
So that's just the first year survival rate. The years following that will be lower, but 90% of people survive a year, which means, that will slowly decline over the following years, but it's a lot longer than these people would have lived anyway.
Yeah, and that's still pretty impressive considering how invasive and how major of a surgery.
Yeah, and like I said, the younger the recipient, the better the outcomes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So work's now being done on removing the immunosuppressant stage post-surgery and instead building a tolerance to allografts using stem cell and chemotherapy treatments. And the signs are pretty good so far. The idea is that they induce chimerism. Have you ever heard of chimerism?
I've heard of a chimera.
Yeah, so what's your idea of a chimera?
I can't remember the combination of animals, but it's some combination of a chimera is different combinations of animals. Is it an eagle and a horse or something?
It was originally a mythological creature in what's now modern-day Turkey. It was a lion with the head of a goat coming out of its back.
Okay.
And sometimes with a snake's head coming from its tail.
Right.
But it's generally applied by historians to any creature that employs parts from different animals, like a centaur or a sphinx or a griffin or something like that.
All right.
So like a centaur has the body of a horse and the head of a man. A griffin has the body of a horse and the wings of a bird, for example, and the head of a bird, I think, as well.
Yeah.
But in biology, it's applied to an organism that has two or more populations of genetically distinct cells. And it's actually really common. So what it means is that one organism has two sets of DNA.
Right, so this happens naturally in the wild.
Yes, it happens naturally, and it happens naturally in humans as well. So the most common type of chimerism in biology is called tetragametic chimerism. So again, it sounds like a scary term, but whenever I hear a sciencey sounding, medically sounding scary term, I try and break it down into its parts. So tetragametic, a gamete is a sex cell. Tetra means 4, so it means 4 gametes, and chimerism is obviously what I described before. So it means from 4 gametes it gives you a chimera. So the 4 parental cells are 2 eggs and 2 sperm.
Right.
Or in more simple terms, 2 embryos, 2 fertilized eggs.
Okay.
Blastocysts for those biologists.
Yeah, right.
Very, very early embryo.
But the dual blastocyst, we're talking about a twin situation?
Twins, yeah.
Right. Cool.
Fraternal twins. It does happen in identical twins as well, but it would be hard to detect because they would have the same DNA.
Okay. So are we saying that a woman who's pregnant with twins is a chimera?
No. Although you've touched on an issue that I'll get onto in a little bit, but no, the woman is not the chimera, but her twins may exhibit chimerism. They may have absorbed some of their siblings' cells in the process of development.
Ah, right. Wow.
Basically, in the case of a true chimera, someone who has 2 sets of genetically distinct DNA, it's usually from a fraternal twin who has died in vitro, and then the surviving embryo absorbs some of the cells of the deceased embryo and incorporates some of its DNA into its own development.
Are these found side by side? So a cell in, say, a muscle tissue right next to another cell that's got its own unique DNA?
It's usually isolated to individual organs. So you might have blood that's of a certain DNA and your organs may be of a separate DNA.
Right, okay.
So it is often asymptomatic or it's very subtle. And a lot of the time, people with chimerism don't know that they have anything different. It can manifest itself in patchy skin or hair. It can also manifest with slightly different eye pigmentation. So if you've ever seen in dogs, for example, that have one blue eye and one green eye, that's chimerism.
Wow, okay.
So they've probably absorbed cells from the embryo of a sibling in the womb. There are also people who have 2 or more different blood types at the same time. So they have some cells that are type A, for example, and some cells that are type B.
Wow.
It can also mean, but it won't necessarily mean, that the person is intersex, or what used to be called hermaphroditic.
Okay.
But it depends if the sex cells are where the chimerism is displayed.
Yeah, gotcha.
There's another type of chimerism called microchimerism, and it's most common in pregnancy. Fetal DNA has been found in a lot of cells all over pregnant women, in their liver, in their heart, in their kidneys, while they're pregnant and soon after they give birth. It's present in 50 to 70% of pregnant women and new mothers.
So how long after birth do these cells remain?
It can be until they die. They've found Y chromosomes in perfectly healthy women. They've found Y chromosomes in their livers at age 102. And they had a son when they were in their 20s. Once it's there, if it's not attacked by your body's immune system, then it's there. So it's theorized to be related to the maternal immune tolerance of the fetus and the placenta during the pregnancy, but it could just be an inert and non-harmful side effect of being pregnant. Microchimerism also occurs where bone marrow transplants have been performed. So the blood that's formed by that transplanted marrow will sometimes match the DNA of the donor and not the recipient.
Okay.
If your blood has a certain DNA and your immune system has been trained not to attack that type of cell, then you won't reject the blood, for example. And when they give bone marrow transplants, it basically destroys the immune system completely and rebuilds it from the ground up. And then the person becomes a chimera and their immune system tolerates 2 different types of DNA in their system. So the idea is that we try and reproduce that effect intentionally so that the DNA of the donor organ is incorporated into the immune system of the recipient.
And so the new organ no longer becomes a rejection issue.
Correct. So it removes the need for the immunotherapy for the rest of their lives.
So does that mean if you're receiving, say, a set of lungs from somebody, you would also need to receive their bone marrow?
I don't believe so. I think that because it's effectively a stem cell transplant once it retrains your immune system from the beginning. So there's a paper in a journal which has a great name, Blood.
What's it about?
Couldn't tell you, but this paper is called Durable Chimerism, Absence of Graft versus Host Disease and the Induction of Donor-Specific Tolerance in Recipients of HLA Disparate Living Kidney Donor Kidney Transplants and Therapeutic Cell Transfer. All that really means is that they gave kidney transplants to 8 patients from mismatched living donors, and also gave them bone marrow transplants at the same time after giving them various types of chemotherapy to suppress their immune system. And basically this then retrained their immune system to cope with the 2 sets of DNA, and all subjects were discharged post-op on day 3 and managed as outpatients. And the weaning of immunosuppression was designed to occur over a 1-year period.
Okay, so you still need to take the immunosuppressants initially.
Yes.
But with the hope that after a year you'll no longer be on them.
Yes, correct. So at the time of writing in 2012, the patients were 13 to 30 months post-transplant. All patients demonstrated peripheral blood macrochimerism, so they displayed the effect that we were hoping for. No patient developed acute GVHD, which is the graft versus host disease, showed evidence of engraftment syndrome, or has developed evidence of chronic GVHD. Chimerism was lost in 2 of the patients at 3 and 6 months post-transplant, so they have gone back onto the immunosuppression therapy. 5 of the 8 patients have been successfully completely withdrawn from immunosuppressants though. Signs look good. It obviously needs a lot more work before it's ready for actual implementation.
Yeah, but the fact that we can do it now, medicine's not getting worse, it's getting better.
That's right, and it's amazing that this is a thing. When I read this, I was like, no, that can't be a thing, surely. I was actually intending to do this subject today. I was intending to do both blood transfusions and organ transplants.
Right.
But once I read about this chimerism, I was so amazed that I spent all of my research time basically reading up on that and dreaming about how amazing the future of organ transplants could be. Basically, to summarize, despite developments recently, organ transplants remain an area of medicine that's fraught with problems and is really only ever used as a last resort. Research continues on ways to improve the entire process, but the progress is incremental and slow, as are most radical medical treatments. The single most effective way of improving outcomes for patients in need of organs is to increase the number of donors. And with that in mind, Australians can go to donatelife.gov.au to register as an organ donor. But like I said before, please have the conversation with your families and make sure that they know that that is your wish, because they can override that request.
Which sounds like it's an issue that needs to be discussed legislatively.
It's not the case in a lot of states in America. If you request to be an organ donor before your death, then your next of kin can't override it in many states in America. But in Australia, that's still the law. And it's not such a big issue if you have that conversation. It's not an easy conversation to have with the people who obviously don't want you to die. But if you do suddenly die and you've registered as an organ donor and your family say no, then basically that means that there are potentially people who will miss out on organs. Because if I went out tomorrow and got hit in the head with a blunt object and died on the spot, just for example, then I would have a perfectly healthy heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, heart valves, skin, corneas, you know what I mean? All of my organs are able to be donated.
Absolutely. But what an awesome gift to give a sick person in need of these organs when it's something that you absolutely, undeniably do not need once you've passed.
Exactly. And I know people get funny about, oh, I don't want them cutting me up when I'm dead, blah, 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 blah. But I can't implore you enough to register as an organ donor and talk to your family about it.
Save a life, people.
Save a life. Well, that was pretty heavy. So maybe it's time for you to get onto something a little bit lighter.
Ooh, alright. So, I'm going to start with a question for you.
Okay.
So, have you ever been so deep in thought that you've lost sense of your surroundings?
Yes.
How about this one? Have you been driving a car and then you kind of come to and you can't remember the last 5 or 10 minutes of your drive?
Yeah, it's kind of terrifying, actually.
And it's something like a loud noise or someone tapping you on the shoulder that makes you, like, snap out of it, if you will.
Often I pull up at my destination and I go, wait, did I drive here?
How did I get here?
It's usually first thing in the morning going to work.
Yep.
It's like, did I just drive to work or...
You're playing out a whole another scenario in your head and you haven't been paying attention to what you're doing.
I mean, usually I'm listening to IdioFacto on my radio.
A good way to pass the time at any time. Well, if you've done any of these things, chances are you've probably accidentally hypnotized yourself.
Really?
Yeah, this is essentially what hypnosis is in true sense of the practice. So we'll get into what it is. I kind of feel like this is in the wrong segment now. I chose hypnosis and hypnotherapy in my week of pseudoscience because I thought it was just that. I've seen people clucking like chickens on stage and I thought, this has got to be made up. These people are pretending or they're planted. There's no way you could make me do that. I've never been hypnotized and I thought, yeah, there's no way that that's real.
It just seems so illogical, though, the whole experience, to completely lose so much sense of yourself that you'd happily do ridiculous things on stage.
Yeah, and this stage hypnotism is such a thoroughly unscientific way of proving that hypnosis is real. There's so many factors, like has that person been planted? Are they pretending out of fear of derailing the show if they don't pretend?
Yeah, there's a lot of social pressure in that situation, isn't there? Because if you don't do it, there's no show.
Exactly. You're going to look like a fool just sitting up there doing nothing, and you might think that people will judge you for making the performer look like a fool.
So that's my only idea of hypnosis is the sort of stage hypnosis and the power of suggestion sort of.
That's right. And the performances make it look like the hypnotist has this complete control over the person participating.
Yeah, but then you have like the Derren Brown type of hypnotism, which is sort of like Inception. He plants an idea in your head and then...
Yeah.
Is that a legit thing or?
Yeah, so this is probably closer to what real hypnotism is. And there's a couple of schools of thought on it, but we'll get into it. It's sort of, I guess it's not necessarily this mind control and the hypnotist has absolute control of this person's mind by some invisible force field and, they only exit it and come back to present when the hypnotist snaps their fingers. But I guess this begs the question, what is really going on in the minds of the hypnotizees, if we will? We'll get into it now. So the etymology of hypnotism, just comes from the Greek word hypnos, which means to sleep, which is essentially what the social picture of hypnotism looks like. I guess if you imagine someone's hypnotized, most often they've got their eyes closed, their head's on their chest.
And it doesn't help that the hypnotist often says, sleep.
Yeah, they use words like, your eyes are getting heavy, you're feeling very sleepy.
You're getting sleepier and sleepier. Actually, I better not do that because people might fall asleep in their cars.
Yeah, don't.
Maybe I have the untapped power of hypnotism.
Actually, in some of the reading that I was doing today, apparently, I guess it's still the case, but a while ago they actually made it illegal in the UK to broadcast on television a full hypnotism scene for fear that people at home in their lounge rooms might get hypnotised and might not be able to snap out of it if they enter another room. Yeah, that's...
Is that a thing that they are legitimately worried about?
It must have.
I mean, is it a thing that they should be legitimately worried about?
Possibly. Probably not. Not over the TV. But as we'll get into this, we'll get into this more. It possibly is a danger if somebody is paying absolute attention to it. So, a bit of the history around hypnosis. I guess people have been entering trances for thousands of years. Ancient cultures have used it as a type of meditation, but modern hypnosis actually started in the late 18th century, sort of conceptualized by this German physician whose name is Franz Friedrich Anton Mesmer. Any of those words ring a bell?
Are you sure he was German? Because that doesn't sound very German to me.
He was absolutely a German man. His nickname was Fritz.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So the word that you might pick up in his name is his surname Mesmer.
Mesmerize?
Yep, the very same. So mesmerism was the original name for hypnotism. He was a little bit off in his belief of how hypnotism worked. He believed it was this magical force that flowed from the hypnotist to the hypnotizee.
That sounds an awful lot like chi.
It is, well, kind of like chi. It's actually more like animal magnetism. I don't know if you've heard of animal magnetism.
Only in a sort of sexual attraction sort of way.
Yeah, so that's what it's used for now. The animal magnetism is like, physical attraction between two people. But back then, it was a term used in his studies, and it was literally a magnetic force that he believed flowed through all living things, and you could actually control it and influence health and behaviour with magnets. And anyway, that's a whole nother episode on animal magnetism and this guy Mesmer, but not hypnosis specifically. In 1784, there was a group of scientists that actually studied Mesmer's methods, and they concluded that it was much more likely to be self-belief and imagination than a magnetic force. So remember that point, because that's the first introduction into what's actually going on with hypnotism. So what is going on during a hypnosis session? So a hypnotist will utter some words. Sometimes it's very direct and forceful. Sometimes it's very calming, almost like a meditation. But generally they will tell you to get comfortable. They will tell you to imagine that you're weightless or something. They'll tell you that you're getting sleepy. They'll tell you that your eyes are getting heavy. And they might make you do something like raise your hand, or they'll get you to stand up and change seats with the person next to you.
See, that's weird because I just tuned out and I tuned back in and my hand was raised. It's weird.
Wow. Yeah, I hypnotised you at the start of the episode.
Right, okay, that makes sense.
And wake.
I also swapped chairs with the person next to me, is that...
If there's someone next to you, I'd be very worried. Seems like you live alone.
Oh, that's my imaginary friend Jake.
That explains a lot. Yeah, but sometimes it's much more, the things that they ask you to do are much more extravagant, like you've seen the chicken clucking that we talked about before, or asking you to tell random strangers that you love them. And sometimes it's almost a little bit darker, like making you forget what your name is, or forget what you look like when you look in a mirror.
Yeah.
Or you might wake up with a different accent. So, are these people for real, or are they just pretending, or is it somewhere in the middle? So in regards to hypnosis and people that are able to be hypnotized, it actually follows the standard bell curve distribution.
Right.
The majority of people fall somewhere in the middle, being moderately susceptible to idiomotor and idiosensory direct suggestions, like raise your arm or draw your hands together or something like that. There's not many people, hardly anyone, feels absolutely no effect during hypnosis, and about the same amount of people are very susceptible to cognitive suggestions like hypnosis-induced amnesia or memory implant or treatment of pain, either adding it or subtracting it. So this is the part that surprised me, and this was the part that makes me think that I'm talking about this in the wrong segment. So hypnosis is actually testable in an fMRI.
Okay.
So in one study, researchers asked the group of people getting studied to fake leg paralysis. So they said, just fake it. Just imagine that you've got leg paralysis. This was not under hypnosis. And they read their brain activity while they were pretending that they had leg paralysis. There was no change in brain activity. And when these people were hypnotized to believe that they had leg paralysis, there was increased activity in the left thalamus, the orbitofrontal cortex, the right cerebellum. All these are just words to me, but what it means is that essentially it's causing measurable changes in the brain. So you can actually tell who's lying and who's really hypnotized if you put them in an MRI.
Does the hypnotic state itself have a particular signature on the MRI?
Just being hypnotized, so to speak, without being suggested anything, is just an increase in alpha waves. But what this means is still inconclusive.
But there's definitely a difference in people who have definitely been hypnotized and people who have not been hypnotized.
Yes, correct. But I believe it's a similar MRI signature to somebody who's in a meditative state, because hypnotism actually starts quite similar to meditation. Relax all of your muscles in your body, pretend that you're weightless, imagine that you're somewhere calm, something like that. In hypnotism, there's the state versus non-state debate. So these are the two schools of thought. The state school of thought basically believes that hypnosis is a specific psychological state, or like a hypnotic trance, or an altered state of consciousness. Whereas the non-state belief rejects this and theorizes that the actual root of hypnosis is just a state of extreme focus, minimizing competing thoughts through this meditative process, hypersuggestibility, having an active imagination, and most importantly, response expectancy. So whether that's conscious or subconscious, having an expectation of what being hypnotized is going to feel like and what you should act like, which seems to be quite widely accepted as the main mode of action, if you will, of hypnotism.
Right.
This expectation.
Mm-hmm. So if you get pulled up on stage at a hypnotist's show and, they click on your forehead and say sleep, and you expect to have your head droop down onto your chest, are you then more likely to actually have that happen?
Well, you might fall into the upper end of the bell curve of hypnotizability, but also it might be that the expectation of this is what it's going to feel like. And possibly, if you're on stage, or if you're anywhere and you close your eyes and you bow your head and you start to imagine calm thoughts and you relax your muscles, you will slightly alter your state of consciousness. And if you do it for long enough, you'll obviously fall asleep.
That's how you fall asleep.
Is you pretend to be asleep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I first heard that, I thought that was hilarious. The way you fall asleep is first you have to pretend to be asleep.
Yeah, which seems like a glitch, right? And it's like a workaround. So this response expectancy is pretty well defined by this personality psychologist, Robert White. He first defined this non-state hypnosis in 1941, saying, quote, "Hypnotic behaviour is meaningful, goal-directed striving. Its most general goal being to behave like a hypnotised person, as this is continuously defined by the operator and understood by the client." So basically what that means is that you know what being hypnotized is going to feel like, you know what it should look like, and the operator is telling you when you're hypnotized, this is what it's going to feel like, this is what's going to happen to you, and this is what I'm going to make you do while you're under. So you've already had those suggestions implanted in your head, and whether they're stored or whether they are expressed consciously or subconsciously.
So, see, I'm still struggling with this because although I have never been hypnotized, given my personality, I know that if I was told this is what it's going to feel like, this is what you're going to do, and this is how it's going to feel, I'd be like, nuh-uh, I'm not going to do that.
Exactly. And this is what the problem that I had was because I thought, I don't think I could be hypnotized while somebody is essentially trying to hypnotize me. Of course, I'm going to be thinking, I'm not feeling anything yet. I still have total control over my actions, over my thoughts. When's the hypnotism going to come? But I actually tried a couple of hypnotisms today online. And there was this guy that said you can kind of almost test your hypnotizability with this test. So do you want to do it now? I can talk you through it. It's very simple.
Yeah.
Maybe sit back from your screen a little bit, so that you can extend your arms out in front of you.
Should we be doing this if people are listening in their cars?
If you're driving or operating heavy machinery.
Don't do this. All right. Yep. Okay, I'm back from my microphone.
Cool. Okay, so you're going to want to put both of your arms straight out in front of you.
Eyes open?
For now, your eyes are still open. So your left hand, put palm up. And your right hand, point it forward, like as though you're going to shake somebody's hand. Put your hand in that position and then make a fist. Close your hand into a fist.
Yep.
So right hand's fist, left hand's palm up. Put them at the same level. Now close your eyes. So once your eyes are closed, imagine this. I've just got the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe book and I've placed it on your left hand.
Great book.
And then I've got a big heavy thesaurus and I've placed that on top of the book. So these are big heavy books and your arm's already starting to get a bit sore. Then in your right hand, in the fist, you're actually holding onto a string that's got a great big helium-filled balloon in it, and that's lifting you up, and that's pulling. It's very, very light, and it's trying to fly away, but you're holding it down with your hand in the string. Meanwhile, your left hand, the books are getting so heavy, you can just about not hold them anymore. It's dragging you down to the ground, and then I put another book on top. Boom, another big heavy book. So your hand's getting dragged even further down. Meanwhile, your right hand is getting shot back upwards with the helium balloon. So it's trying to lift your hand to the sky as the helium balloon floats away. Now open your eyes. And where are your hands?
Exactly where they were before.
I was exactly the same.
Right.
Which may mean that we're towards the lower end of the hypnotizability. Maybe it needs to be a different setting. Maybe it would work better if it was face-to-face.
Right. My arms did get sore though, but I think that's because I haven't been to the gym in a few years.
In forever.
Yeah. Oh, damn. I guess I can't be hypnotized. Although, like you said, it really depends on the circumstances.
Might be a different case if you're in a hypnotist's.
Anyway.
Anyway, we'd love to know if that hypnotism worked on you. I'm not a hypnotist. So...
Well, until today, you pretty much didn't even think that hypnotism was a real thing, so...
That's right, yeah. There's still elements of it that I'm questioning, but it's only because I haven't been through it myself. So Robert White's definition of the non-state hypnosis is backed up by other psychologists like Robert Baker and Graham Wagstaff, who claim that hypnosis is basically a set of learned behaviours. We know what hypnosis is supposed to look like and feel like, what a hypnotised person is supposed to behave like, and therefore, when we're in this highly focused and relaxed state and we're easily suggestible, our subconscious brain takes care of the rest. It takes care of the behaviour, and it tells you, okay, now it's time to act like a hypnotised person. So it's not to say that it's fake. The state of your mind that you're in is measurable, but the actions after this may be more to do with your personal learned expectation of hypnosis.
Right, okay. So what does that mean from a therapy perspective then?
Well, it absolutely has applications. So hypnotherapy is the thing. It's used to treat addiction. It's used for weight loss. You've probably seen ads for virtual stomach banding.
Virtual stomach banding.
Virtual stomach banding.
So in the same way that you were suggesting to me that I had heavy books in one hand and a light string pulling on the other, in this case would suggest to someone that they have had lap band surgery and that their stomach is smaller than it was before.
Exactly right. So it would have the same effect as the real surgery, but it's just... It can also be used for pain management. It can be used to treat fears and phobias and even depression and anxiety. Sorry, this is what it is used for.
Right.
Not necessarily what it can be effective on.
Okay.
So the trance, as it were, is not beneficial by itself. But in that state, the patient can be fed images and ideas. They can rehearse the given scenarios in their head under this hypnotic state. So it's like Inception.
Okay.
But there were a couple of interesting case studies I looked at. So the first one was using hypnotherapy to treat irritable bowel syndrome. So it was in a journal by the British Society of Gastroenterology. It was an 18-month return analysis on these people who had undergone hypnotherapy to treat their IBS. And overwhelmingly, in fact, 100% of people in this study who were under the age of 50 exhibited total remission from IBS 18 months later after undergoing hypnotherapy.
Wow.
Over 50, it was lower. It was, much lower. It was 25% that were in remission.
How many people is that we're talking about?
Yeah, 50 patients.
That's a lot more than I was expecting, to be honest. 50 patients in the entire study or 50 patients under the age of 50?
50 patients in the entire study and those that were under 50, and it didn't specify how many there were. I'd
be interested to know if there was only 2 patients under 50, for example, that is going to skew those results a little bit.
Yes, it would have. I'm actually not sure. I should have looked at that. But so some of the patients showed signs of relapse, or they relapsed and started to suffer from IBS again, but they were able to be treated with a single session of hypnotherapy.
Wow. We just want to jump in here because upon editing, we actually found a full copy of the paper, and it turns out that it's not quite as scientifically rigorous as we would have liked.
Yeah, this is the mark, I guess, of being a true skeptic, is that you can question your sources, even if at first glance, which is what happened to me, I believed that I was getting this from a reputable source. It was published by the British Society of Gastroenterology.
And it's doctors from the Department of Medicine at the University Hospital of South Manchester, so it's not irreputable.
Yeah, this is not a high school science project.
That's right. But looking at the design of the study, there was no control group, and it is extremely credulous and willing to believe that hypnotherapy is effective, and it's not setting out to disprove the effectiveness, which is the biggest thing for me, I think.
Yeah, I guess if you start with a hypothesis, you kind of take every path either side to either try and prove or disprove it, whereas reading it post-recording and having a really good look at the article, it seems more like it was aiming to support hypnotherapy rather than just to find the truth regardless of what it may be.
I thought we'd better jump in here and just let you know that we are putting more stock in the Cochrane Review article than we are in this one. I'm not saying that it's completely wrong, but it's just a bit doubtful as to whether we can put a lot of trust in it. And it just goes to show how difficult it is to be a true skeptic sometimes. It's really hard to find good sources.
And we encourage you to even be skeptical of us too, because we do our best to fact check and to find sources that we believe at the time are credible. But like we always say at the end of every show, if you want to send us an argument or some facts that either support or disprove something that we've talked about on the show, by all means send it in and we will bring it up in another episode. We're not above going back on what we've talked about.
And if you want to have a look at the article yourself, there is a link in the show notes.
The other one that I looked at, I found in our friends the Cochrane Library.
Ah, yes.
It was using hypnotherapy to quit smoking. And this study was a little bit more doubtful on the uses of hypnotherapy. They have not shown that hypnotherapy has a greater effect on 6-month quit rates than other intervention methods or no treatment at all. So it's interesting that it can be used on some things so effectively.
Well, I do know that IBS has a large component of stress induction. So again, much of that could be placebo effect, given that you think that it's going to help you and therefore it lowers your stress levels about it and therefore you don't get as frequent IBS?
Possibly. It didn't talk about it wasn't, as far as I'm aware, a placebo-controlled trial, but I just didn't investigate the effects of the placebo. But I guess you could be right, it's just a different way of administering a placebo, if you will.
There's also, I noticed that all of the conditions that you suggested that you said that it was used to treat, am I right in saying none of those were physical conditions, really? They're all either have a stress element to them or are psychological conditions.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, probably the only physical condition was other than the weight loss, but that has a mental component to it, is the pain management.
Yeah, I guess there's arguments that has a psychological element as well.
Yeah, you're right. It absolutely does.
For example, it would be a useless treatment for cancer.
Yes, that's right.
Because it's about your brain and affecting your thoughts. To say that you are cured of your lung cancer is not going to cure you of your lung cancer. But there is an argument to say that even though that's the case, it may have a placebo effect that would help you.
Well, it could possibly, if you had hypnotherapy, to, I guess, suggest that the chemotherapy was going to be more effective after you underwent this hypnotherapy. Possibly the placebo effect could take hold and you'd be less stressed. Again,
all this is assuming that the person who it's being performed on is susceptible to hypnotism.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it would be pointless to do on, if your test before was accurate, on me or you, for example, if we're not prone to be hypnotized. Because I'm just going to go, well, this is a placebo effect and it won't make any difference.
Yes. I guess the important thing is that all of these examples of hypnosis and hypnotherapy are clinical, and the type of hypnotism that most of us are familiar with is stage hypnosis, which is mainly for entertainment.
Yeah.
It's mainly relies on subject selection, suggestibility, with a generous serving of stagecraft and trickery. So I suppose the bottom line with hypnosis, it's absolutely undeniably measurable in brain scans in, I guess, a similar way to a meditative brain. And it has many therapeutic applications, but it can't necessarily be used for a cure-all. It's not a form of mind control device in which the hypnotist has ultimate power over their subject. It's highly reliant on personal expectations. So ultimately, the hypnotic state does not come from a hypnotist. Hypnosis comes from within yourself. So the brain is such a powerful machine. Ultimately, this is what it can do to you under the right conditions. So did you take all that in, or do we need to go back to the start and I swing a watch in your face?
No, I'm pretty sure you hypnotised me from the start, so now it's all been inceptioned into my brain.
I hope so. There'll be a test.
Oh, I was in an hypnotic state from the very beginning because your voice is just lulling me into that state. I showed my mum the trailer for IdioFacto, and she said, "Oh, Levi sounds like he's got a really good voice for this sort of stuff."
Thanks, Anne.
I was like, what do you mean? What about me?
Would you say it's mesmerising?
Ooh, are you a German physician? Because
You just mesmerise me.
it's the worst pickup line in history.
Yeah, don't use that. Especially not on me.
That's it for this episode of IdioFacto. Forward all suggestions, hate mail, evidence and arguments to idiofacto@gmail.com.
And you can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all of the other socials at IdioFacto. Links will be in the show notes.